Good evening, New Orleans Saints fans, and happy Wednesday to all of our Bayou Blitz family. I hope everybody is having a terrific evening. I am Bob Rose. I am one of your co-hosts for the Bayou Blitz podcast. Joining me is my partner in crime and my fellow co-host, Brendan Boylan. Happy Wednesday to you, Brendan.
Hey, happy Wednesday. Hopefully you're doing all right. We got a lot that kind of hit us over the last couple of days in terms of Saints news. We'll get to it. It's weird seeing you in Denver stuff.
Isn't it? It's weird putting it back on.
I was going to say, I know that was your childhood team. So you got a little bit of ties to some of our news today with Sean Payton. We also have some news with some further coaching staff changes, some that we didn't see coming. Tom Brady retires. We just have a lot of NFL news today, a lot of Saints news today. Excited to get to all of that. But real quick, I did want to remind you guys, at least over here on YouTube, we just selected a winner for the Drew Brees Funko Pop over on Twitter. So this is your last hour to get in your submission. If you haven't already, just in the comments, name and favorite Bayou Blitz moment of the year. And you're automatically entered to win a Drew Brees Funko Pop. So don't miss out on that. If you haven't already, go ahead and just throw all that into the comments. Bob, let's hit the big news first. I think everybody knows in New Orleans, and if you're part of the Who Dat Nation, I know you already know the news that I'm talking about. It's right there on the bottom of our screen. The Saints have agreed to trade Super Bowl winning head coach Sean Payton to the Denver Broncos. In exchange, the Saints receive a first-round pick this year, though it's at the end of the first round. They will grab a second-round pick next year. They send the Broncos Sean Payton and a third-round pick. Bob, this time last week, the title of our show was actually Sean Payton Talks Stalling, with a question mark. How quickly things could change within a week. The Broncos were the front runners for majority of this thing. They finally land their guy. A team that doesn't have a whole lot of draft capital. Remember all that draft capital they gave up for Russell Wilson just last year? They have even less now, but they get a guy in Sean Payton who is an offensive-minded guy for an offense that really struggled a season ago. Do you think the Broncos... You can't even say won the trade because we're not going to know who won this trade for many, many years. But do you think the Broncos got their guy and that the Saints got what they wanted in return?
Yeah, I absolutely think the Broncos got their guy. And I think that that's the guy that they were targeting from the very start. This new Broncos ownership, the one that's been coming under a lot of fire already for a disastrous hiring of Nathaniel Hackett as head coach and a controversial, at the most, blockbuster at the least trade for Russell Wilson last year that cost them 2 number 1s and 2 number 2 picks. And for an offense to finish that bad, this new Broncos ownership, they needed to make a splash. So forget all the reports that you were hearing about them targeting DeMeco Ryans. He was their fallback guy. He's a defensive guy. Forget everything that you were reading about the Broncos were interviewing this assistant or that assistant. They were doing their due diligence, as Brendan and I cautioned you all of last week. But they were targeting Sean Payton and or Jim Harbaugh from the very start. Those were the two splashiest names. And Sean Payton, I am convinced that is the guy that they really wanted. Because when you give up that much for what the Broncos did for a quarterback, and when you have been so abysmally bad on offenses, not only Denver was last year, but really since 2014, the year before Peyton Manning retired. That Super Bowl 50 championship that they won was on the strength of a historically good defense, with Manning a year too late to get into retirement. So they needed an offensive guy in at the helm, and they wanted a big name to try to hopefully turn on that fan base that has been increasingly disillusioned. So the Broncos were a clear front runner from the start, regardless of whatever cloak and dagger reports you were reading about. Sean Payton wasn't in love with the ownership after he met them. The coach immediately refuted that claim. Russell Wilson had a long phone conversation with Sean Payton. That part we know is true. I already touched upon, the Broncos were targeting D'Amico Ryans. D'Amico is an exciting young guy. No doubt he was a fallback option. But again, Sean Payton is the guy that they wanted. So, that they won. The Saints won because they get a first-round draft choice and a second-round draft choice, 2 picks that they didn't previously have, for a guy that was on their payroll that wasn't going to do a darn thing for them next year. So the Saints won. Sean Payton won because it was abundantly clear that he was content with having a year off and he wanted to get back into coaching. Folks, that was never going to be with the New Orleans Saints. I'm sorry. I wanted it too, but it was never going to be with the New Orleans Saints. Sean Payton wanted, craved, needed a new challenge, and he has one. And I don't think that Coach Payton is going to be hurting for money anytime soon. The reported contract that he's going to be getting from Denver is anywhere from $17 to $20 million per year. And again, the Broncos weren't afraid to spend that with this new ownership group that had ties to Walmart. I don't have to tell you how much money Walmart has. So they made it very clear that they were going to spend big for a head coach, that they wanted that head coach to have a big name attached to him. So everybody, at least initially, everybody got what they were looking for out of this.
The reports were that Sean Payton was burnt out. I think needing a new challenge is kind of part of that. Anytime you're burnt out of anything, you don't want to return to the same situation in which you were burnt out from.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think the fans are going to receive this? Some fans, some in our chat, saying he quit on us. People agreeing. Some are going to be thankful for all the wonderful things that came from the Sean Payton era. Winningest coach in New Orleans Saints history. Obviously, only Saints head coach to win a Super Bowl, and from 2006 to 2021, the Saints were top 2 in points, offensive yardage, and passing yardage. Sean had a lot to do with the New Orleans success. In my opinion, I'm happy that he was able to work something out with the team where they mutually respected each other.
Mm-hmm.
Found a great situation for Sean and found a great situation for New Orleans in terms of compensation coming back. Bob, how do you feel about it? And then 2, how do you think the fans should and potentially will feel about it going down the road?
Fans, I'm not going to tell you how you should feel about it. But the people that are throwing up in our chat, or that just generally feel that Sean Payton quit on you, do you feel that way about Drew Brees? I think that's a legitimate question, because Drew Brees also legitimately retired 1 year before. So if you feel this way about Sean Payton, I believe you should feel this way about Drew Brees. As far as the way I personally feel about Sean Payton, I'm disappointed because I love the guy. I love what he brought to the team. I love the fact that he changed the culture. So it was literally an about face from the culture that the New Orleans Saints were used to for the first 35 years of their existence. Give or take, I might have the years wrong, so I apologize for my lack of math. If Drew Brees gets a statue outside of the Caesars Superdome, and I believe he deserves one, I believe Sean Payton is equally deserving of such a statue. You're talking to a coach who has resigned positions not once but twice because of burnout. Certainly not at the NFL level. I'm certainly not at Sean Payton's caliber whatsoever. But nonetheless, I was a very successful coach at the level that I was at. And I know what it feels to be personally burnt out, to be just tired, to look for a new challenge. There is nothing wrong with any of that. Am I disappointed? Yeah. Do I still want Sean Payton back on the New Orleans Saints sidelines? Absolutely. I mean, the man is an excellent coach, in my opinion, already an NFL Hall of Famer. with the opportunity to expand on that resume. But I don't begrudge the man a personal decision, and that's what this was. He didn't have any strife with Mickey Loomis. Certainly had no strife with the Loomis, with the Benson family or Saints ownership. He handpicked a lot of those Saints players from the 2021 team that he quote unquote, not quote unquote, that he stepped away from. And I believe Coach Payton when he says that he truly wishes success for the New Orleans Saints going forward. Undoubtedly, he doesn't wish for success whenever that Saints team plays his now Denver Broncos. But I don't begrudge a man a personal decision for whatever reasons. He said he was burnt out. He said he needed some time with his family. He took that time. Whether 1 year is enough for you, for me, for Sean, apparently it was enough for Sean because he decided he wanted to get back into it. When I stepped away from my coaching positions, I wasn't away long before I wanted to get back into it. That is the competitor's fire. And I promise you, shortly after Drew Brees retired, he wanted to get back into it. He was having second doubts. So again, I say anybody that thinks that Sean Payton quit on you or quit on the New Orleans Saints, you should probably feel the same way about Drew Brees. Having said that, I am certainly respectful of your opinion. That's just where I stand on the matter. Brendan, how about you?
Yeah, I think kind of what I alluded to earlier. I think anytime you have burnout, it doesn't make any sense to go back to a situation in which you were burnout from. In terms of competitive nature, that's not just with sports, that's with anything. It's not even a competitive nature. If you love something and you step away from it, it's hard to be away from it for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're a writer, whether you're a coach, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a professional video game player. I mean, whatever it may be, you step away from it, and after a while, you're gonna have that itch to come on back.
Mm-hmm.
That's a part of it. And while
that same thing that made you successful as a competitor makes it just as hard to step away and stay away from it.
Exactly. And for me, looking at it, whether this was the plan all along to take a year off and try to get back into it, whether it was the plan from day one or whether it wasn't, well, let's just feel it out and see how long I want to be away from it before I really want to get back. Regardless of what it was, the one thing that I think a lot of people need to keep in mind is Sean didn't owe it to New Orleans to do them any favors. And the fact that he went about the process trying to get the Saints draft compensation, goes on the herd with Colin Cowherd and makes it very clear on public air, the Saints want a first-round draft pick for me. Sean didn't have to say that. Is that planting a seed? Is that making it very clear? Is that doing the Saints a favor? Yeah. A little bit. Making it pretty straightforward is, hey, if you want me, this is what it's going to take. Come get me. And, the Saints wouldn't publicly say it. Sean wouldn't publicly say it. But they helped each other out in getting them in a situation where they were both happy. And so with that, no hard feelings. It would have been nice to see Sean back, especially with how dismal the offense has been.
Yeah.
But I also understand that it's a business. It's a part of it. You and I have been a part of sports teams long enough. You and I have been covering the Saints long enough and covering the NFL and various other sports long enough to know it's all a business. This was a business decision, but it was a friendly business decision, which doesn't always happen. So I think at the end of the day, fans can feel however they want. Sean's going to end up in the team's Hall of Fame. He could very well, like Bob alluded to, end up with a statue outside the stadium. I think there's a very strong chance he ends up in the Ring of Honor. He'll go down as the coach that turned it around, because let's not forget, when Sean came to New Orleans, there was rumblings about the team moving.
Yep.
Whether those things want to be declined or those rumors wanted to be shut down very quickly by the Benson family, we know for fact those conversations were happening. So as much as people praise Drew or praise Mickey Loomis and everything that happened from 2006 on, Sean had as much to do with that as anybody else.
Oh, yeah. You figure before Sean Payton got here in 2006, the New Orleans Saints had 5 playoff appearances in their entire franchise history and 1 playoff win, along with 0 appearances in the NFC Championship game. Sean himself had 9 playoff appearances, 10 winning seasons, 3 appearances in the NFC Championship game, and of course, you know about the Super Bowl championship. I think that's a drop the mic resume right there. Yeah, we could stop right there, but with Sean Payton, it goes on. And again, he didn't do it by himself. I mean, Drew Brees didn't do it by himself. Mickey Loomis was a big part of this. Countless number of players, that we've already seen a handful of them elected into the Saints Hall of Fame. We might see a few of them in Canton. We're going to see boatloads more in the team Hall of Fame. This was a team effort, but at the very top of that pyramid were 2 guys named Brees and Payton.
Absolutely. So that's where I stand on the situation. I wish the best for Sean. Obviously, when he comes back to New Orleans, I hope that he gets the tribute video and the ovation that he deserves. That's kind of where I'm at with the situation. And we talked about the offense being dismal last year for New Orleans. Let's go ahead and kind of turn the tides of this conversation to more news when it comes to the coaching staff and guys that actually were on the payroll and coached a season ago. Some big changes in terms of the defensive coordinators. Ryan Nielsen leaving New Orleans. He was hired by the rival Atlanta Falcons for their opening at defensive coordinator. And a shocking move just a few hours before we got on the air. And that was Chris Richard, who was a co-defensive coordinator a season ago, obviously very well respected across the league and known for his time with the Legion of Boom in Seattle, has been let go by New Orleans as well. So New Orleans is 2 defensive coordinators from a season ago, no longer with the team. This comes as a shock, Bob, because you and I talked about it so much over the back half of the regular season. The Saints defense was very good. They were actually historically good in terms of franchise history. And they were the main reason the Saints were even in the conversation for that NFC South title towards the end of the year. Only one change offensively in terms of the coaching staff to this point. They don't bring back the tight ends coach, which was a bright spot for the offense. Then you flip over to the defense and say, well, they were a bright spot, especially the second half of the year, and they lose one co-defensive coordinator to a in-division rival, your biggest rival, and then you let the other one walk. Now, there are some rumblings that Richard and the Saints, these are just rumors right now, nothing that I can confirm, and Bob, let me know if you have any sources that can confirm this, is that it was mutual, as if Richard wanted to be the defensive coordinator, he wanted play calling a part of that, and Dennis Allen is still calling the plays defensively. So there are rumors that it was mutual, but nonetheless, very surprising to see after losing one co-defensive coordinator to see the other one go as well.
I agree with you that it was surprising, but I don't put it at a high shock value. First of all, I think the Saints backed themselves into this corner, with this co-crap, assigning Ryan Nielsen and Chris Richard as co-defensive coordinators at the beginning of last year, when you already knew that Dennis Allen was going to be the czar in charge of the entire unit to begin with. Ryan Nielsen, I think, is a huge loss. I can't say enough about what that man did for the Saints defensive line. He is an outstanding coach. The Atlanta Falcons got a great hire, and the New Orleans Saints lost what is, in my opinion, the best coach of their entire staff, offense or defense. And then to turn around and lose Richard. And you're right. The reports that we're hearing, the sources that we have, say that it was a mutual decision. And it was based off of it's titled as philosophical differences between Richard and Dennis Allen, or Richard and the organization. It's not hard to read between the lines. Richard, who has been a defensive play caller before in this league, a relatively successful one, probably wanted more control. Dennis Allen was unwilling to give up that control, which was, I thought, one of the problems with this team last year to begin with. It took Dennis Allen. If you're going to assign letter grades to Dennis Allen's coaching as a head coach in 2022, I would assign an F, and that's only because I can't go any lower. Perhaps one of the reasons why he did so poorly was because DA is an outstanding defensive mind, one of the best in the league on that side of the ball. But as a head coach, even coming into this year, we had right to doubt his abilities because of his previous fairly short stint. So maybe he was spreading himself a little bit too thin by continuing to concentrate on the defensive side of the football instead of broadening his focus like most head coaches would do. In Chris Richard and or Ryan Nielsen, you had the opportunity to delegate some authority. And if there's one thing I've learned as a coach over the years, whether you're young or experienced, it is the toughest thing to learn is how to delegate authority and delegate responsibility. Dennis Allen has been a big fat failure in that department so far. And I think because of that, it's cost the New Orleans Saints two very, very good defensive minds. Where do the Saints go from here? I think the very first thing they need to do within the next 24 hours is promote linebackers coach Michael Hodges to the defensive coordinator spot, because you better believe that some guy wearing a visor that's going to be living in Colorado is going to be looking to poach some coaches and players that he knows and is familiar with and comfortable with. Michael Hodges is an outstanding position coach. And if DA is going to be in charge of the defensive play calling, then you need to immediately promote Michael Hodges to give him an increased title that's not going to make him untouchable, but going to make it very difficult to hire him away, because it would be a lateral position, and therefore the Saints might get compensation for it.
Sticking with that, obviously a big hole to fill for New Orleans on their coaching staff now. And once the Sean Payton domino dropped, we just felt like there was going to be more and more dominoes dropped throughout the offseason. So the biggest dominoes dropped. Now you don't have a defensive coordinator. If you're going to look outside of the organization, which the Saints have made it a point to hire within, but should they decide to look elsewhere, who are some names on a short list for you, Bob, that you think could come in and fill that role well down in the Bayou?
Brendan, I'll be honest with you. I'm not prepared for that conversation tonight. I don't have even a short list compiled. The easy thing to do, folks, will be look at the more accomplished defenses throughout the National Football League, not only this season, but within the last couple seasons, and then look at the position coaches, on those units, because that's the kind of talent that the Saints will likely be going after, especially if Dennis Allen is going to continue to have the ultimate control over the defense. You're probably not going to be able to bring in an experienced defensive coordinator on a lateral move that's really willing to take less control over the unit. So, if they do bring in guys from outside of the organization, it's going to be position coaches with other teams. And I'm, like I said, I apologize. I normally would pride myself on being prepared for a topic like that, but I don't have even a short list of names in front of me at the moment.
Well, in your defense, Bob, it did happen just about an hour before we got on air, so I guess we'll give you a free pass.
No
This go
excuse.
around.
I could have skipped my pregame or pre-show cigarette. I could have skipped dinner. I didn't do any of that. I was selfish.
Yeah, you could have skipped dinner with your family and done all that, but nonetheless, no. New Orleans in an interesting spot. I think the biggest surprise to all of this is seeing what has happened defensively with the coaching staff, considering it was a unit that played really well last year. We had nothing but high praises of the defense over the last 8 weeks of the
At
season.
least against the pass. Now, against the run, this unit did struggle mightily.
I was going to say, I mean, Cameron Jordan even tweeted out, right, when the compensation came back for Sean Payton, he was already tweeting out defensive tackle, and then decided to, quote, retweet his own tweet and go, I understand we need a quarterback too. But nonetheless, no, there's a lot of question marks there. I think the biggest question marks are how do you lose your co-defensive coordinators, but don't make any changes on the offensive side of the football. And with all that, and I do want to open up Pandora's box a little bit here. It's a little early to get in these conversations, but since we're on the topic of coaching and coaching staffs on today's episode, is this: New Orleans needs a quarterback. New Orleans needs direction with this offense, and a lot of things are going to get answered over the next couple months, right? What happens with Mike Thomas? Who's going to be the quarterback? I think it's pretty clear that Jameis isn't going to be back. Andy Dalton could be back in some capacity, probably as a backup or a mentor to whoever they bring in. Is Jarvis Landry going to come back? Is Mark Ingram coming back? There's all these questions that we'll have answers to and it'll all get worked out. But when decisions like that are made, you're typically making those decisions around a system, around a play caller. And at least for now, it looks like it's going to be Pete Carmichael. Do you see in any universe, multiverse, Saints-verse, that they make a change after seeing some of these dramatic changes defensively? Do you think the team would consider making some changes to the offensive side of the football before this thing continues to snowball into what should be a pretty crazy offseason?
Yeah, I could see it happening. I think we might be too far along for the Saints to bring in any significant offensive or any offensive coaches to fill significant roles. In other words, if I'm reading between I am reading between the lines of what you're asking, and the man who drew so much fury from the Saints fans this year, Pete Carmichael. I still think that it's a possibility. I know the team announced that Pete Carmichael will be back next year. It still would not surprise me if they moved Carmichael into a senior advisory role or something like that. Something that keeps him within the organization, but moves him away from game day play calling. But I think we're too far along in the process now, too far along in the offseason to bring in another offensive coordinator from the outside. So if the Saints make that decision, make a decision like that, rather, it's because that they feel that a guy like Ronald Curry, who is going to be the offensive coordinator for the national team at the Senior Bowl next weekend, a guy like Ronald Curry, or a guy like that I really like, receivers coach Cody Burns, one of those two guys, or maybe a guy like Doug Marrone, the offensive line coach, who has been an offensive coordinator, not only in the NFL, but for the New Orleans Saints. One of those three guys, the Saints would have to feel comfortable and ready for game day play calling duties. Because again, some guy wearing a visor in the state of Colorado could be gunning for some of these offensive coaches. Sean has a real long and close relationship with Pete Carmichael. Sean has a real long and close relationship with Doug Marrone. Sean coached assistant offensive line coach Zach Strief. Sean originally hired Ronald Curry. And he's going to be looking to fill an offensive staff as well as a defensive staff for the Denver Broncos. Now, not all of Sean Payton's coaches are going to be former Saints or guys that he knows, but you better believe that a handful of them certainly are. Does that leave Pete Carmichael as a possibility to leave New Orleans altogether and join Denver? I can see it. The most successful years of Pete Carmichael's coaching career have been with Sean Payton, as Pete has been sitting in the background, kind of behind the curtains. That is where you and I have said time and time again this past season that Pete Carmichael is obviously at his best. Designing a game plan during the week, keep him the hell away from game day decisions. So I still think that there are a lot of potential moving parts with this offensive staff, not only guys that could be poached by Payton or other teams, but perhaps decisions that are going to be made within the organization by Dennis Allen and or Mickey Loomis to move guys around. Again, maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, move Carmichael into an advisory role. Shift Ronald Curry over into a play caller role, or if not Curry, Doug Marrone, or if not Marrone, Cody Burns. Take a chance on one of those three guys, because you clearly need some big changes on the offensive. We think they clearly need big changes on the offensive side. According to what New Orleans has done so far this offseason, they evidently don't agree, which concerns the living bejesus out of me as we sit here right now.
Well, also worth noting, remember Ronald Curry interviewed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yes, he did.
For their offensive coordinator role. You and I are on the same page about this. We've talked about and we've joked about, you take three business sounding words or football terms and you throw them together and you have a new job title in a comfy office chair for anybody. And in this case, we would give Pete Carmichael the role of senior offensive game consultant. That's 4 words. I just added another one. Whatever. You give him that role as an advisor or a consultant or whatever. Because he still is believe it or not, guys, he's still a good offensive mind. He has the resume to prove that as well. And then you promote a guy like Ronald Curry, who's obviously gaining some interest from other people. He was the quarterback's coach and offensive game plan strategist, if you will, this last year. And we had our own issues with the passing game. If you guys just have to go back. If you haven't sat here and listened to us talk every Wednesday, go back and watch some other episodes and listen to us rant about how the passing game was bad. But if that's going to be the game plan, that's got to happen now.
Mm-hmm.
Are the Saints likely going to have a bridge quarterback this year? Yeah. I honestly, personally, and again, this is a conversation we'll have for many more weeks down the road. I don't see the Saints going and grabbing a guy like, like Derek Carr's been thrown around a lot. I don't see that being the case where the Saints throw a ton of money at a guy. I see them rather going and grabbing a guy that's going to just fill the spot for the year, whether it's Andy Dalton again for the year, whether they grab a familiar face in a bridge quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater. That's the route I see New Orleans going rather than throwing a ton of money at a guy, especially when there's so many question marks. I mean, let's face it. Dennis Allen knows he's on the hot seat. Pete Carmichael knows he's on the hot seat if he isn't already. And we don't know if either of those guys are going to be with the team even halfway through next season. So if you're the front office, what sense does it make to go, you know what, let's throw a ton of money at a quarterback that might not fit a system moving forward, whether it's with Dennis Allen and Pete Carmichael or whether it's with someone else. And I know in a case like Derek Carr, and that's one that makes a lot of sense, right? He has a relationship with Dennis Allen. If he's not traded by a certain day, He's more than likely just going to get cut outright. And at that point, I could see the Saints making a move for a guy like that because
I think they're absolute morons if they trade for him.
Because
but
the
if
contract.
if they cut him, all of a sudden, two attractive free agent possibilities would be both Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo. So I agree with where you're going.
Oh, and Jimmy G is another good example. Maybe not of a bridge quarterback, but a guy that could fit multiple systems and just be and I guess be a longer term bridge guy to mentor a guy and what have you. But again, all that quarterback talk to come back to the point of we don't even know if this coaching staff's going to be around. And that's not saying that is putting it into perspective, rather, how bad last year was. And I know people can turn and go, well, the injuries. Yes, we have addressed that multiple times, right? That this team had key injuries at just about every level on defense, defensive line, linebackers, secondary. They had injuries to every position on the offense for at least some point of the season. And special teams, was there injuries? Sure. I mean, Harris was the big one out of that, but Will Lutz was not the same guy coming back from his injury. Yeah, injuries were a big part of the year, but that doesn't change the fact that it was a disastrous season. And a lot of that falls on coaching. So let's address this because we talked about Derek Carr and Jimmy G, and these are the comments that came up with what money the Saints are broke.
Stop it.
Well, I was going to say, let's play advocate a little bit, devil's advocate here a little bit. I've said for a long time, whether it be my time with Saints News, whether it be my time on this show, or making appearances on others, that at some point, it was going to catch up to the Saints. Are we at that point? And I see this. This is the comment that I was getting to. It's time to pay the bill off. I think we're at that point where you recognize that your championship window has closed. And at this point, Bob, for the giggles of it, it is closed. The door is locked. The key is thrown away. They have boarded the door. They have poured cement on that doorway, on that entrance. It's closed. It's gone. That doesn't mean you blow the team up.
No.
That doesn't mean you let go of some of your key veteran pieces, but that gets to a point of admitting, okay, we really don't need to be spreading out any more contracts. You want a prime example of understanding that? And you guys could also make the argument, well, he's been hurt, Brendan, but a key example of understanding that is going, okay, let's move on from Michael Thomas. That's a key example. Another key example would be, let's not bring back Jarvis Landry. And just understanding that, hey, this window's closed. Somebody else threw it in there. Let's stop living off the credit card. And let's just clean up the books this year with a bridge quarterback that isn't going to make a whole lot of money. You don't throw in the towel for next year, but you're not fighting for it like you would some of those last years of Drew Brees. Does that mean they can't go get a quarterback if they want one? Absolutely not. They could make that work. The Saints are what? Are they like $54 million, maybe $56 million in the red right now?
I thought it was just shy of 57, but you and I are both in the ballpark, yeah.
50 something.
Mm-hmm.
50 something. Okay. The Saints have been in much, much worse just last year, the year before that. You're looking at like $100 million in the red, somewhere in that ballpark. This would be a breeze for the Saints to get out of. And the way that these contracts are written up would be fairly easy. They can go get a quarterback if they want to, or if they find a quarterback that they feel fits what they want to do moving forward. So there is money there.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean to expect New Orleans to throw a ton of money at guys this offseason. Kind of like last season, I didn't expect the Saints to throw money at Marcus May and Tyrann Mathieu and Jarvis Landry. Even more so, I wouldn't expect any of that this offseason. But they could if they wanted to.
Yeah, the key to that is, and I really only see them doing it with if they have an opportunity to get a can't miss defensive tackle in free agency, or if they do sign a quarterback that they believe is going to be a long-term starter. With any of those guys, but particularly with quarterback, you can backload a contract. Where if you sign a Jimmy Garoppolo to a 4-year deal, you can make a lot of the first 2 years of the deal incentives, clauses, things like that. And load the back half as your team is, because guys, it's going to take more than 1 year to get out of this credit card debt known as the salary cap. It's going to take minimum of 2 because of the way they have restructured and pushed all these contracts down the road. So if you sign a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo or a Derek Carr, a guy that you think would be a long-term starter for at least the next 4 or 5 years, then you're going to backload those deals, with a lot of incentives early on. And I'll give you a good example of what I mean. David Onyemata is scheduled to be an unrestricted free agent. A lot of people assume that the Saints just aren't going to bring him back. I actually think that the Saints will bring him back, because whether David Onyemata is on the team or not in 2023, he is going to cost at least $10 million against their salary cap. So if they lose him as an unrestricted free agent, they not only have to fill the spot that David Onyemata has vacated via his absence, but they're going to still be paying David Onyemata $10 million next year. He's $10 million of dead cap. So it's those kind of things. And you mentioned Michael Thomas before, Brendan. Andrus Peat. Andrus Peat, Ryan Ramczyk, other guys. They have pushed these deals back and restructured. And everybody was criticizing at the time because of the mess that they're now in. But they can continue to kick this can down the road. Marshawn Lattimore is on a fairly recently signed contract. Eric McCoy is on a brand new re-signed contract. Those are 2 guys that they can push down the road. Cam Jordan is entering the final year of his deal. A guy like Cam Jordan, they can add voidable years onto his deal. Now, they're only going to do that kind of thing, like you said, Brendan, if they feel like they have a reasonable shot at competing, not necessarily just for 2023, but even into 2024. You're going to look at some of these guys. Lattimore's still a young guy. McCoy's still a young guy. That's why you restructure these deals and push them back. Now, having said all that, I still believe that the key to this team's future is finding a quarterback in the draft. With a first-round quarterback, you have a 5th-year rookie option, and you have them on a rookie deal, which opens up a whole ton of scenarios throughout the rest of your roster. So, getting this, albeit low, first-round draft choice, that gives you more ammunition to move up. Or even if you sit pat and a guy like Hendon Hooker falls to you, or the kid from BYU, Hall, he's creeping up the draft board slowly but surely. It'd be a stretch to take either one of them late in the first round. But if you identify them as a potential franchise quarterback, you pull that trigger, and then hopefully you have that major box checkmarked for the foreseeable future. And now all of a sudden you can play some financial roulette with some of the rest of your roster pieces.
That's a great point with where the draft pick lies, because look at years past where quarterbacks fall, and that 5th-year option on a quarterback is huge. huge. And you see a lot of teams do what, Bob? They trade back into the back half of the first round to get a quarterback. We were just talking about Teddy Bridgewater. That's a perfect example as well.
Or a quarterback especially, but any position.
Right.
And every year at the draft, you see people question in different fan bases, why would they trade up to get that guy at 27, 28, 31? They could have got him in the second round of the draft. Guys, they do it because that's an extra year on a rookie contract. And that's particularly key for a guy, for a quarterback or a wide receiver, another position who we've seen salaries escalate so greatly in the last year or two. That's why they do that, ladies and gentlemen.
For the Saints team, I think, especially this draft, there's a lot of ways they could go. One position that I think is very, very overlooked right now would be running back. Do you take a first-round running back? Probably not.
Nah.
But looking at getting a guy on a young guy on a rookie deal for 4 years to play alongside and then eventually replace Alvin Kamara potentially, that's a big one. Quarterback's going to be interesting, though, to see what the Saints do. At 29? Do they take a quarterback? Do they go defensive tackle? Do they find replacements for X, Y, and Z? There's a lot of things to consider as the Saints get closer. And here's the other thing with that, Bob, just to kind of close out and wrap out our conversation with the coaching and the changes and Sean Payton. And you alluded to it earlier, is you didn't have these draft picks before this trade was made. How vital was it for New Orleans to get back in the first round this year? In terms of like checklists for the offseason, that had to be at the very top. Listen, is it disappointing to lose the draft pick that they would have had this year to Philadelphia, who's about to go play for a Super Bowl? Yes, it's the number 10 overall pick. Did we expect it to be that low? No, I didn't. I thought this was a team that would have, they did compete for the NFC South. Air quotes, compete.
Technically, yeah.
Technically, I expected them to win the division. I didn't expect them to go do anything masterful. I did say they were a dark horse contender in the NFC. Should people have stayed healthy, and that didn't happen. But here's the thing, is they used that pick to be able to trade up and get Chris Olave, who's a huge bright spot on this team. So when you look at it that way and you get the first round pick for Peyton, you recouped what you gave up for Chris Olave, and now you're going to get a guy with a 5th-year option. That's going to be so vital and so huge down the course of the next few years for New Orleans, because let's be honest, barring some type of miracle, it's going to be a tough couple years for the Saints as they rebuild past the Breeze and Peyton era. Having a guy, whoever they get, whether it's a sexy pick, whether it's a term that gets way overused in the draft, whether it's a sexy pick or not, it's going to be really vital for the success of New Orleans moving forward. And Bob mentioned it best, because of that 5th-year option, what it's going to be able to do in terms of salary cap relief, and the fact that the Saints can get out of this salary cap mess a lot quicker and pay off those credit cards, to go with the term we were using, a lot quicker than maybe we thought.
Yeah, and you say they have the ammunition now. If they're able to move, if they choose to try to move up in the first round to get one of those, one of the quarterbacks, Stroud, Bryce Young, those are the top 2 on my board by far, really. But if you're a guy that likes Levis from Kentucky, or Richardson from Florida, if you identify either one of those guys, now all of a sudden you have a first this year and a second this year. You have a first next year and a second next year. I'm not saying trade all 4, although it would probably take at least 3 of them to move up. Having a first rounder this year to swap in a blockbuster trade to move up is vital. to dangle for other teams. Again, because of that fifth-year option. If they choose to stand pat and choose to just rebuild the rest of their roster, you have 3 picks in the top 75 this year, 4 in the top 120, along with a first and second round pick next year. That's a heck of a way to do it. And we have seen the Saints hit pretty big with the 2 draft picks, even in recent memory. So whichever strategy that the New Orleans Saints choose to employ, they are now in a position to do so because of the trade of Sean Payton, who, again, folks, he wasn't going to coach for New Orleans this year. He wasn't going to coach for New Orleans again. So you got what you could out of him. Do you really think that Mickey Loomis and Gail Benson were sitting back in their office and saying, you know what? We're going to turn down these better offers from this team just because Sean Payton wants to go to Denver? What you said earlier, Brendan, is that Sean Payton probably did the Saints organization a favor as much as they did for him in trading him. Because remember, the Saints could have refused to trade him outright too, and just let him sit and twist in the wind. But I believe that they all met with each other and they figured out mutually what would be best for all parties involved. And don't think for one second, folks, that the Saints didn't get the best deal that they possibly could for Sean Payton. I have found that absolutely ridiculous within the last 24 hours or so. Seeing on social media, that the Saints lost this trade. They don't know what they're doing, this and that and everything else. No, don't believe that. Honestly, don't believe that for one second. The New Orleans Saints got the best value they could possibly get for a coach that didn't coach this past season.
I'll tell you what, to make some people feel better. Different sports, mind you. I got a text from a colleague of mine. He spent about half a decade in the Chicago White Sox organization. Spent some time with me during my time with ESPN and the smaller Division I schools broadcasts. And he texted me, said, that's quite a haul for Sean Payton. When you have guys that have worked with major league organizations or professional organizations like that, texting me saying, man, I think that's quite a haul. What do you think? That should be enough to tell you, hey, they did pretty good. Would it have been nice to get the haul that John Gruden got all the way back or Parcells got? Yeah, of course. Is that realistic in the modern NFL? No. It's not. And I can't stress what Bob said enough. That you essentially traded a guy that wasn't going, put it in player terms, a guy who wasn't going to play for you, a guy that found a way, if you will, out of his contract and said, hey, just trade me. And you turned that, a guy who didn't produce for you at all last year, into a first and a second round pick. That's a win for me. That's a win for any team in the league. Again, when the rumors started coming out that, the Saints are demanding 2 firsts and this and that, that is starting here and negotiating your way down. It's a very basic sales tactic. And that's what the Saints did. They were successful at it. But it's an absolute W for New Orleans to grab a first-round pick. And like Bob said, 4 in the top 120. Look at some of the greatest Saints draft classes and how many picks came in that first 100 to 125 and how many the Saints hit on. I'm not predicting that this draft is going to be an 06 or a 17 by any means. But I'm saying the pieces are there for you to be successful in that process, to where they weren't quite there just 48 hours ago. Yep. And the first round pick, you don't want to put that much emphasis and that much pressure on the first round pick, but it is mighty important. And
it is. For the Saints to win this trade long term, they have to hit on these draft picks, whether they sit with all the picks that they have and choose players there, or whether they package it and use it as ammunition to move up. And again, they're in a position to do either. But whichever they decide to do, they 100% have to hit on these picks for them to be not only a winner in this trade long term, but to have viable contender status as a franchise for the sometime in the foreseeable future. Because if they don't hit on these picks with all the salary cap problem that they have, you're talking a fan base that's ready to jump off every single bridge along the Mississippi River.
Well, Bob, let's close out the show here this evening. We talked a lot about Sean Payton, talked a lot about this compensation. I think it's interesting, too, before we completely close out, is that a lot of times we in the media don't do justice by some of these trades. We go back in time and we go, oh, Sean Payton was traded for, a first and a second, but nobody talks about what those picks became. And that's
Right.
much more popular in sports like, baseball, right? There's a lot of player to be named later. How many times do we look back and see who the player to be named later was? Never. How many times in the NBA do we have a superstar caliber player traded for like 5 first-round picks? Look at like the Donovan Mitchell trade over the offseason. Is anybody going to look back in 20 years and be like, I wonder who those picks became? No, it just doesn't happen. But to your point, Bob, it is very vital in the long term to see who won this trade by, what does that first-round pick become? What does that second-round pick become? But I think you also have to keep in mind that while there are busts, while things don't work out for a lot of guys, the fact that you were able to get that compensation, put yourself in a position to build and grow and be successful, that's the W for right now. You put yourself in a position to win, if you will. It's just about executing at that point. And some of it's out of your control, right? You can have the perfect prospect, and it just doesn't work out. Right. You want best example I could think of, because you're wearing the Broncos shirt. We talked about the Broncos. Remember when Peyton Manning was traded to the Broncos, and Indy has the number 1 pick, and Indy's got the best quarterback prospect since Peyton Manning. Andrew Luck had a good career, but it was never what it was supposed to be.
Nope.
And he was the perfect prospect. There are things out of your control. We'll just see what the Saints do with pick number 29. Bob, a lot of fun on the show today. Our social media platforms have grown tremendously. A lot of it has to do when you give away free stuff. People like to follow you. People want to know what's going on. We will have some more stuff that we will be giving away here this off season. Obviously, for you guys that participated in the social media giveaway, thanks so much for doing so. For that Funko Pop, for some of you that don't have social media, again, you got about 3 minutes to enter for our YouTube giveaway. Just name and favorite memory of the Bayou Blitz for the 28 episodes that Bob and I have had together. 28, Bob. Quick math tells me, no, we're not quite halfway to half a year together on the show. But, man, we're getting close. It's been a lot of fun. For the people that don't know how to check us out on those social media platforms and follow you particularly on social media, where can they do so?
Folks, before I tell you, like Brendan said, we are going to have more giveaways through the summer. Different kind of contests. We're going to have some fun with them. Maybe some, Bob Rose or Brendan Boylan impressions. Whoever does the best impression, that kind of thing. What's that?
That's dangerous. I don't know if I want to do that.
Well, you know what? I'm already throwing myself out there. I criticize some people's opinions about the Sean Payton trade. I'm sitting here wearing a Denver Broncos Super Bowl champion jersey. I got to believe you muted some of the chats, of people tonight that might have had some criticisms of me. So, why not? Why not throw myself out there more? But listen, from here on forward, you're going to have to already be following us to be eligible for future contests, or at least for the foreseeable future. So I'm hoping that just because you did, if you didn't win tonight, that you all of a sudden unfollow Bob Rose or unfollow Brendan Boylan or unfollow the Bayou Blitz. We're going to continue to have fun with you. We're going to continue to put out the best product we know how to do, and we keep promising you all kinds of guests this off season. the New Orleans Saints have to stop being the major news story of the day, so that way we can focus on X player's career. So when that happens, we'll do it. In the meantime, you can follow me, Bob Rose, on Facebook. I'm at Bobby R2613 on Twitter. And obviously, as most of you know, we have a Bayou Blitz Facebook page and our Bayou Blitz Twitter page at Bayou Blitz Pod. Guys, you've made Brendan's page, my page, and our Bayou Blitz pages grow so significantly since even the start of this show, 28, 29 weeks ago. Remember, we're gonna be coming at you weekly throughout the off season, all kinds of draft coverage, all kinds of free agency coverage. So continue to make this your show, like you have been doing so spectacularly. Make it into a national power. Honestly, that is the direction that we're headed. Brendan throws some numbers at me some weeks, and we're right on par with the biggest Saints podcasts out there already. I want to surpass them, and I want to be on level with some of the national NFL or national sports podcasts. And you guys are responsible for us getting to where we are already. You guys are going to be equally responsible for making your show a continued powerhouse. Thank you for everything that you have done so far, and blessings, and thank you for everything that you're going to continue to do for your show in the future.
Absolutely. Quick shout out John Butler, because he's better at math than me, but 28 weeks is more than half a year. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. I'm not good at math on my feet by any means. For myself, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram over at BT Boylan. Make sure you follow Bob and John Hendricks and Kyle T. Mosley and all the great stuff with the Saints News Network and what they're doing and what they're growing over with Sports Illustrated. We're going to have a lot to talk about. Obviously today was a lot about Sean. A little bit about some coaching staff changes. We're going to have so much to talk about with all these different dominoes that are going to fall. Like I said, Sean Payton's the biggest one. So now that that's over, get to breathe a little bit, get to see some more smaller dominoes fall. We get to talk to some great guests that we're going to have on here in the future. Wanted to thank you guys again for all that you've done in growing the show. And we'll have a little bit of a Super Bowl preview next week, because it's a big deal. It's a big deal. A quick shout out to Jalen Hurts and Pat Mahomes. It's going to be the first time in NFL history that you have two black starting quarterbacks in a Super Bowl. That's kind of threw me for a loop. I didn't realize that until I saw it, but that's a pretty amazing thing. So, guys, again, thanks so much for tuning in for the Bayou Blitz podcast, episode 28 for Bob and I. That's Bob Rose. I never get this pointing thing down. That's Bob Rose. I'm Brendan Boylan. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for another episode of the Bayou Blitz podcast. Until then, find peace, spread love, practice positivity. We'll see you next Wednesday.